I want to start with an uncomfortable truth. If you've lived through multiple market booms and busts, and you're still shocked every time the market falls, you haven't learned anything. I'm serious. I've watched smart, experienced people panic in the same way, make the same mistakes, and tell themselves the same comforting lies for over 50 years. Different headlines, different decades, same ending. And if you're watching this in your 50 seconds, 60 seconds, or 70 seconds, worried about whether you still have time to recover from the next mistake, you need to hear this. Markets don't care about your comfort. They don't slow down out of kindness. They don't forgive ignorance just because you've survived this long. Most people believe experience protects them. They think, I've been through crashes before, I'll handle the next one better. But the truth is harsher than that. I've seen people who lived through 1,973, 1,987, 2000, 2008, and 2020. Still overexposed, still complacent, still shocked when losses show up. Not because they're stupid, but because they never truly accepted how markets work. They confuse familiarity with understanding, survival with wisdom. The cost of that confusion gets higher as you age. When you're young, a mistake is painful but recoverable. When you're older, a mistake is permanent. I've sat across from investors who didn't lose money because they lacked intelligence. They lost money because they assumed the next cycle would be kinder than the last. And markets are never kind. They are indifferent. The lesson of market cycles is not about predicting them. It's about surviving them. Over my career, I stopped trying to be clever, stopped trying to look smart, and stopped believing that experience alone would protect me. By the end of this video, I want you to understand one thing clearly. Cycles never stop, people never learn, and you can behave differently, especially if time is no longer on your side. This isn't about maximizing returns. It's about minimizing regret. Here's the first thing most people never accept. Market cycles are not mistakes. They are features. Early in my career, I used to think extreme events were rare. Black swans, one-off disasters. Something that happened because of unusual circumstances. That belief didn't survive long. I watched optimism turn into euphoria, euphoria turn into leverage, and leverage turn into collapse over and over again. The cause changed. The pattern didn't. What people call a surprise is usually just the result of ignoring history. When prices rise for long enough, people stop asking why and start assuming it must continue. My takeaway was simple. If something depends on optimism to survive, it's already fragile. Stop asking what could go right. Start asking what happens if things return to normal. Normal is dangerous when prices assume perfection. That leads into the second thing I've learned. Risk is highest when it feels lowest. This lesson took most investors decades to learn, if they ever did. Risk doesn't announce itself with fear. It hides behind comfort. When people are scared, they see risk everywhere. When people are calm, they assume risk has disappeared. That's backwards. I've never seen more risk than when people say, this time is different. Low volatility, easy money, rising prices, and confident forecasts are not signs of safety. They're signs of neglect. In every major cycle, risk didn't come from obvious dangers. It came from people ignoring danger entirely. I learned to ask a different question. What am I being paid to bear risk right now? If the answer is not much, then risk is high no matter how calm things feel. When markets feel boring and safe, reduce exposure. When markets feel painful and frightening, consider leaning in carefully. People resist this because it's uncomfortable. Most investors are wired to follow feelings, not facts. I had to learn that feeling safe is often the exact opposite of being safe. I've also realized that most losses come from behavior, not bad assets. People love blaming markets, banks, or bad luck. But decades of reviewing outcomes prove something uncomfortable. Most people don't lose money because they bought bad assets. They lose it because they behaved badly. They chased what worked, abandoned what didn't, bought late, sold early. One portfolio can be perfect on paper, but if the investor can't tolerate temporary pain, it's doomed. Emotional preparation matters more than intelligence. That's why I tell people to build portfolios they can live with during stress, not just admire on a spreadsheet. I stopped thinking about how much I could make and started thinking about what could take me out. That single shift changed everything. After a few wins, people stop respecting uncertainty. After many wins, they stop fearing loss. That's when cycles do the most damage. Treat confidence as a warning signal, not a green light. Let me be clear. The goal is not to be right. The goal is to last. If you survive long enough, compounding works. If you don't, nothing else matters. That's why I started prioritizing avoiding catastrophic loss over chasing exceptional gains. I've seen all the booms, the busts, the bubbles, the recoveries, and here's what never changes: human behavior. People panic when they shouldn't, and they celebrate when they should worry. I've watched seasoned investors overreact to the same market signals over and over, thinking this time it will be different. It never is. That's why I always assume I could be wrong, especially when I'm confident. Confidence is seductive, but it can be deadly if you're not careful. I learned to treat it as a warning sign rather than a green light. There's a myth that experience protects you. It doesn't unless it changes your behavior. Experience without discipline is dangerous. I've met beginners who were careful and veterans who were reckless. Time alone doesn't teach you patience or humility. Success often makes people more dangerous because it convinces them their instincts are reliable. I had to force myself to remember that. Every time I made money easily, I reminded myself that the next mistake could be catastrophic. That mindset saved me more than any clever strategy ever could. Another lesson is that cycles are not just numbers on a chart, they are emotional events. Fear and greed repeat with frightening regularity. People feel euphoric at peaks and paralyzed at bottoms. I've learned that observing the crowd's behavior tells you far more than obsessing over economic data. Markets are driven by human emotion first, fundamentals second. I've often stayed defensive when everyone else was euphoric, and cautiously opportunistic when everyone else was terrified. It's uncomfortable to be lonely in your thinking, but the payoff is survival. I've also realized the most important question isn't how much can I make? It's how much can I lose before it hurts too much? That's what risk really is, permanent loss, not daily volatility. People confuse the two all the time. Volatility is just noise. It's uncomfortable but temporary. Permanent loss is what destroys retirement plans and ruins lives. I spent decades learning to focus on the latter. I don't get excited when my portfolio jumps 20% in a year. I get worried when it's exposed to losses that could be permanent. That's the difference between being lucky and being prepared. I want to be honest with you. Chasing returns late in life is dangerous. Most people don't fail because they're unlucky. They fail because they are undisciplined. They see opportunity, feel envy, and act without considering what's at stake. That's the lesson I learned the hard way. One big mistake near retirement can wipe out decades of hard work. I've watched brilliant people recover from early setbacks, but a late life disaster is often permanent. So, I stopped chasing the excitement of markets and started asking, what will I do if this goes wrong? That question changed every decision I made. Let me clear up a few myths that keep people trapped in cycles of regret. You've been told that markets always recover. That's half true. They do, but you might not be in a position to wait. You've been told that volatility equals risk. That's wrong. Risk is permanent loss, not temporary discomfort. And you've been told experience protects you only if it changes your behavior. Otherwise, it just makes you overconfident. Internalizing these truths may feel uncomfortable, but it's far better than learning them the hard way. I developed a simple framework to help me navigate cycles, something I call CARE. Consider history, look at extremes, patterns, and what people forgot last time. Assess risk, not return. Don't chase rewards. Ask what could go wrong. Respect uncertainty. Assume you're wrong before the market proves you're right. Ensure survival. Never bet in a way that removes your future options. That's it. Simple but effective. Most people complicate investing unnecessarily, and that's where trouble hides. I've learned that patience is not passive, it's active. Sitting still is often the smartest thing you can do. Overtrading destroys more wealth than underperforming. Watching your portfolio sit quietly while the market moves around you feels wrong. But that's exactly when compounding works its magic. I've made more progress by avoiding mistakes than by chasing gains. It's boring, yes, but it works. I've also realized that timing the market is harder than anyone admits. Most people think they can predict peaks and troughs. They can't. I can't. No one can. What you can do is prepare, behave rationally, and manage risk. That's why I prioritize defensive positioning and emotional readiness over clever forecasts. You can't control the market, but you can control how it affects you. That mindset separates people who survive cycles from those who don't. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is that most people misunderstand risk completely. They see volatility, they see headlines, they see short-term drops, and they panic. But risk isn't volatility. It's permanent loss. Volatility is uncomfortable, but it can be survived. Permanent loss, on the other hand, changes everything. I've seen people retire with solid plans only to watch a single market collapse erase years of careful saving. That's why I stopped chasing excitement and started respecting uncertainty. The moment you realize the difference between temporary fear and true danger, your decisions improve dramatically. I've also come to accept that doing nothing is often the smartest move. Sitting still doesn't feel like progress, but in markets, in life, and in wealth, restraint is a superpower. I've watched people make countless trades believing activity equals intelligence. Most of the time, it doesn't. Action without purpose often destroys more wealth than inactivity. If you can learn to resist the urge to constantly intervene, you give compounding the time it needs to work, and you avoid the traps set by human emotions. Boredom is a good sign. It often means you're behaving correctly. I've learned that being early often feels wrong. One of my first instincts is to cringe at contrarian moves. Everyone else is euphoric and you feel isolated. You're lonely, second-guessing yourself. I've been early on, many investments, and it was uncomfortable every time. But being early beats being wiped out. People confuse discomfort with error. I've had to force myself to lean into that discomfort because it's usually a signal that I'm behaving differently from the herd in a potentially advantageous way. The market rewards those who are willing to be patient while everyone else panics or celebrates. I want to be brutally honest. The smartest investors aren't the boldest. They're the most careful. That goes against everything popular culture tells you about success, but it's true. I've seen aggressive, clever people build huge positions quickly, feel invincible, and then vanish in the next cycle. Longevity is more important than genius. You can be intelligent, hardworking, and disciplined, but if you don't survive, none of it matters. I've built my wealth by valuing survival above ego, and that decision has saved me more than luck or skill ever did. I also learned that greed and fear are incredibly predictable. Every major boom and bust I've witnessed has followed the same emotional path. People feel euphoric at the top, terrified at the bottom, and usually wrong at both extremes. I've trained myself to observe the crowd's behavior and do the opposite when it makes sense. That doesn't mean being contrarian for the sake of being different. It means using historical patterns and logic to guide your actions rather than emotion. Most people can't separate themselves from the crowd because they don't recognize how much their decisions are being influenced by others. That's the trap. I've noticed something else. What just worked is often the most dangerous thing to chase. Recency bias is a killer. People see recent winners and assume they'll continue. They pile in, believing the next move will resemble the last. I've seen it in stock markets, real estate, and bonds. You have to fight that instinct constantly. My rule became, don't confuse performance with safety. Don't confuse popularity with soundness. Just because everyone else is winning doesn't mean you should join them. Often, it's the warning sign that the top is near. I've always tried to prioritize avoiding catastrophic losses over chasing big gains. That mindset forced me to accept modest returns at times, but I've never regretted it. People chase glory while ignoring the damage that failure can inflict. I've seen portfolios destroyed by a single mistake, and the lesson is clear. Focus on survival first. That approach may feel boring compared to high-risk adventures, but boring often outperforms dramatic over decades. The compounding effect of patience and caution is underestimated by most investors. I've also realized that nobody can perfectly predict markets, and no formula will protect you from every downturn. But that's not the point. What matters is preparation. Preparation means having enough margin, enough liquidity, enough emotional readiness, and a portfolio that can withstand pain without forcing irrational decisions. I've built my career on asking myself, could I survive this if everything went wrong? If the answer is yes, then I can afford to take measured risks. If the answer is no, I step back. Survival over pride. That's the difference between those who make it through cycles and those who don't. Finally, I want to stress something most people ignore. Time is not on your side when you're older. One mistake late in life is far more costly than the same mistake when you're young. Your margin for error shrinks, and the consequences compound faster. I've seen investors survive early mistakes because they had time to recover. I've also seen late life mistakes destroy decades of careful work. That's why I insist on caution, preparation, and patience. The goal isn't excitement, it's survival. I want to clear up a few myths that have trapped investors for decades. First, you've been told that markets always recover. That's true only if you have time and the patience to wait. If you're late in life or near retirement, a single crash can be permanent. Second, you've been told that volatility equals risk. That's wrong. Risk is permanent loss, not short-term fluctuations. Volatility is uncomfortable but survivable. Third, you've been told that experience protects you only if it changes your behavior. Otherwise, it just makes you overconfident. Internalize these truths, and you're already ahead of most people. Ignore them, and history will repeat itself with you as the victim. I developed a framework I call CARE to help me navigate cycles. It's simple but powerful. Consider history, look at extremes, the patterns, and what people forgot last time. Assess risk, not return. Don't chase rewards blindly. Ask yourself what could go wrong. Respect uncertainty assumes you're wrong before the market proves you're right. Ensure survival. Never bet in a way that removes your future options. That's it. Most people complicate investing unnecessarily, and that's where trouble hides. CARE keeps me disciplined, grounded, and alive in a world that encourages risk and punishes complacency. I've learned that timing the market is harder than anyone admits. Most people think they can predict peaks and troughs. They can't. I can't. No one can. What you can do is prepare, behave rationally, and manage risk. That mindset separates those who survive cycles from those who don't. I've prioritized defensive positioning and emotional readiness over clever forecasts my entire career. You can't control the market, but you can control how it affects you. That's the lesson most people never internalize. They let the market dictate their emotions instead of the other way around. Patience is an active skill, not a passive state. Sitting still is uncomfortable, but in investing, as in life, restraint is often a superpower. Overtrading destroys more wealth than underperforming. Watching your portfolio move slowly while the market jumps around feels wrong, but that's exactly when compounding works its magic. I've made more progress by avoiding mistakes than by chasing gains. It's boring, yes, but boring wins over decades. That's what separates survivors from the rest. I've also realized that being early feels wrong, but that doesn't make it incorrect. One of my first instincts is to cringe at contrarian moves, and I've been early on many investments. It's lonely and uncomfortable, but being early beats being wiped out. Discomfort is a signal. If you're alone in your thinking and it feels uncomfortable, it often means you're doing the right thing. People confuse loneliness with error. Markets reward patience, rationality, and courage, not the crowd. The smartest investors aren't the boldest, they're the most careful. That's counterintuitive in a world obsessed with risk-taking. Aggressive, clever people build huge positions quickly, feel invincible, and then vanish in the next cycle. Longevity beats genius. Survival matters more than intelligence. I built my wealth by valuing survival above ego, and that decision has saved me more than luck or skill ever did. Greed and fear are predictable, and learning to recognize them is invaluable. What just worked is usually the most dangerous thing to chase. Recency bias is a killer. People see recent winners and assume they'll continue. I've seen it in stock markets, real estate, and bonds. Don't confuse performance with safety or popularity with soundness. Everyone else may be winning, but that often signals the top is near. I prioritize avoiding catastrophic losses over chasing big gains. Modest returns feel boring, but they accumulate quietly, while dramatic risks often destroy. Compounding quietly over decades is underestimated by almost everyone. No one can perfectly predict the market, but you can prepare. That preparation includes margin, liquidity, emotional readiness, and a portfolio designed to withstand pain without forcing irrational decisions. I constantly ask myself, could I survive this if everything went wrong? If the answer is yes, I can afford measured risk. If the answer is no, I step back. Survival over pride is the difference between people who last through cycles and those who don't. Time is shrinking for those near retirement. One late life mistake is far more costly than one made when young. Your margin for error decreases and consequences compound faster. I've seen investors survive early mistakes but lose everything late in life. That's why caution, preparation, and patience are non-negotiable. The goal isn't excitement, it's survival. I've seen every market cycle imaginable, and here's the truth most people never accept. Markets change, but human behavior doesn't. If you keep reacting the same way, you'll keep getting the same results no matter how much experience you claim. I didn't succeed by predicting the future. I succeeded by respecting risk, controlling my behavior, and staying in the game when others couldn't. That mindset, more than anything, separates the survivors from the rest. If you want more hard-earned lessons without sugarcoating, subscribe to this channel and don't miss the next one. The next cycle is always coming. The only question is whether you'll be ready this time.